coming up on the Lead Ministry Podcast.
Sabbath is not ceasing from activity and sitting still. That is not Sabbath. Sabbath is reconnecting with your Creator and reconnecting with other humans and beginning to envision what is it going to be like when heaven finally gets here.
Now your host, Josh Denhart.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Lead Ministry Podcast. My name is Josh Denhart. Super grateful that you're here. I love doing this. I love having these conversations with Bill Van Kirk, my co-host, and I love having these conversations with you. I got to be honest with you. It is fun when people who have listened to the podcast reach out and say, hey, that was powerful. That ministered to me in this way. Or we see them at a conference, or I get an email. So all of those things are extremely helpful for us. But today we're going to carry on this discussion about burnout and how we can hopefully avoid it. Am I right, Bill?
Yeah, absolutely. A big ministry topic for anybody in ministry.
That's
how
exactly
we can
right.
avoid burning out completely.
And we want to make sure that we do avoid this burnout thing. And there are ways that we can go about doing that. It's gonna make your life easier. It's gonna make your life better. So we're doing this little series on burnout. Well, guess what? We're calling this the silent killer of ministry. Yep. It's burnout. It's painful. It's bad. It's kind of ubiquitous. Like I said on a previous podcast, I remember I met somebody and they were young and they were fired up. And I said, hey, have you met the villain of everybody who's in ministry? And they're like, huh? And I said, well, it's burnout. Have you met them? And I said, oh, wow. Well, I don't mean to burst your bubble, but you're going to meet them.
Yes,
it's only a matter of time. But that's what this podcast series is about, is how to avoid burnout. Well, rest is not a bad thing. That's our topic today. Rest is not a punitive timeout. This is not you getting your hand slapped and you need to go sit in the corner for a timeout. No, rest is a gift from God. And I got to be honest with you, Bill, cat out of the bag. Years ago, I viewed rest in some ways as punitive because I was just so fired up and I just wanted to go 90 miles an hour nonstop. And I began to run into burnout, physical burnout, and not pacing myself. And so then I would go, okay. I understand. God wants me to take a day of rest. And so then I would sit there and hold the wheel with like, with white fingers, white knuckling it, waiting until I could put my foot off of the brake and I could hammer the gas again. That is not a way to view rest.
I can't, you are actually describing my life. Because that's how I feel sometimes. I'm usually okay. If I've been running really hard, I'm usually okay with a day off, right?
Sure.
But if it goes this weekend, we're going to sit at home and we're going to do nothing all weekend. By Saturday afternoon, I'm going to start peeling the paint off the walls and repainting just because.
This is totally me. And so I have this hunger to get stuff done.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we'll talk about it in the podcast today, but part of my reframing has been, hey, can you pour into relationships when you're not moving ministry forward? That is getting something done. I have to frame it in terms of some form of personal accomplishment. But to stop, because, Sabbath is not ceasing from activity and sitting still. That is not Sabbath. Sabbath is reconnecting with your Creator and reconnecting with other humans and beginning to envision what is it going to be like when heaven finally gets here.
Yeah, I love that. And I actually think that this has to do with purpose. So your purpose in doing ministry is, for a lot of people in ministry, and it should be, is very high. And so because you have such a high purpose in doing ministry, you want to do ministry all of the time. But when you slow down and you're with your family, you have to realize that you have to change your purpose a little bit. You have to say, yes, I'm still a minister, but right now my purpose is what God has called me to in my family, which is building relationships, which is spending time with them, which is getting to know them and shepherding them and loving them. And I think if you frame it the correct way, like you were saying, that can be super helpful for you to feel like I am being productive. I'm being productive in what God has called me to be as a father, as a husband.
That's right. And that's in the evenings. That's
Yep.
over lunch when I come home, and it's also on the weekends. It's certainly not like,
Yep.
okay, it's 6 days of burn it for the ministry, and one day, okay, let me re-engage with my family, you know?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Balance.
Balance. Yeah. So rest is not a timeout. It's not a punitive slap on the hand. It's actually truly a gift from God. So we want to define this. We want to develop it, and we're going to actually give you some practical steps for doing it. By the way, stay tuned, because the practical steps for doing this were actually a life change and a game change for me. Okay. What is hard ministry and rest? Why is ministry hard, and what is this thing rest? So why is rest so elusive in ministry? Well, here it is. There is no end to what we could do. Can I have an amen?
Amen.
It's the truth. There is just never, it's the ever, we talked about this earlier. This is why a culture of, the culture of ministry can be kind of preset for conditions of burnout, because there's literally no end to what we could do. Also, we have very poor examples of rest. I don't know. I have great examples of burnout.
Mm-hmm.
I have great examples of mismanaged stewardship. I don't have very many good examples of rest. I'm going to push pause on this and say, my buddy and I, we talked a long time ago that there's the guy standing on the stage, right? And he's admonishing everyone. And he even showed a picture that his daughter drew with crayons, and he wasn't in the picture. He was at the library studying to get his PhD. And so don't do what I did. And I have this platform because I'm so successful because I did what I'm telling you not to do. I have this platform because I
Yes.
went so hard. I got the PhD. I completely neglected my family. Now don't go and do that.
Yes, I know. So it's a negative example.
It is. So he's speaking from I screwed this up. And my friend was always like, man, is there ever somebody who can have the platform and be given the mic that didn't screw it up, and they're speaking from their negative experience?
Yeah, that's a
Drama.
great question. I never thought of that. That's amazing.
Yeah. So my buddy and I, we've actually literally gone round and round, and we call it this guy's name, who will remain nameless, but we say it's the this factor. It's the, I'm here because I burned it at every end. And now my platform is don't burn it at every end. It's like, oh my word, what do we live in here?
Don't be the negative example.
Yeah. So we have poor examples of rest. I don't have anybody who has been championing rest. I have people who were like, oh my word, he's just so accomplished. Okay. The other thing, we have a warped view of rest. It's either a pipe dream, yeah, right, who can ever have rest, or it's viewed as laziness. Both of which are misaligned.
Right.
So taking a day off from moving the ball forward isn't lazy. Okay. And
right.
The idea that you can take a day off, some people are like, well, what is this day off that you speak of?
Right. It's elusive.
It's elusive. Yes. Yeah. So why is rest so elusive in ministry? Because there's no end to what we could do. We got poor examples of rest, and it's either a warped view, it's a pipe dream, or it's billed as laziness. So that's what we're talking about today. Now, this is a longer passage of scripture, but it's one of my favorites. If you're watching on YouTube, you can actually read along with us. And if you're listening, just make sure you pay attention. This is found in the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 4, verses 5 through 8. And it says this: the fool folds his hands and consumes his own flesh. One hand full of rest is better than 2 fistfuls of labor and striving after the wind. Then I looked again at vanity under the sun, and there was a certain man without dependent, having neither a son nor a brother, and yet there was no end to all of his labor. Indeed, his eyes were not satisfied with riches, and he never asked, and for whom am I laboring and depriving myself of pleasure? This too is a vanity and a grievous task. Now stick with me. There are three people that are identified inside of this passage in Ecclesiastes. There is a fool on one hand who folds his hands and it consumes his own flesh. On the far other side, there's this guy who was manically working. He had no dependents, no son or brother, and yet there was no end to all of his labor. Those are the extremities. And then sandwiched in the middle is the right person. Now, Bill, I am no Hebrew scholar, but I can read those who are. And the Hebrew scholars would teach us that this is a very strategic type of writing or a device. Like we would have alliteration. We might say several S's in a row, right? That's alliteration, right?
Yep.
Okay, whatever. That's a device that is used to punctuate a sentence or something like that, to bring it to the, we can, in digital terms, we can use an underline, a bold, or an italicize. That's a way to accentuate. Well, in ancient Hebrew, a way to accentuate it's kind of an envelope. On one side, you have one way. On the other side, you have the other. In the middle is the right thing. It's an envelope, is what they call it. Mm-hmm. Interesting. And so we have that happening right here. On one hand, you have big guy over here, bad news, bad news. The fool folds his hands and consumes his own flesh. The other guy all the way over here, the other side of the envelope is, he has no brother, no son. He's not, like he can't even say, I'm going to leave this as an inheritance. He doesn't even have that as an excuse. And yet he still doesn't understand why he's obsessively working and never stops. So you got somebody who doesn't do any work. You have somebody who obsessively works all the time. But the passage from a Hebrew writing standpoint is driving us to the middle person. And let's talk about that right now. So Ecclesiastes 4:5, the fool folds his hands and consumes his flesh. Guess what? If you are so lazy that you're sitting on your couch and you can't even lift your hand to go grab some food off of the table and put it into your mouth, you're that lazy. He folds his hands. He doesn't even move his hands. And guess what? His body now begins to eat its own muscle as caloric intake because he's that lazy. He begins to consume his own flesh because he's that lazy.
That's pretty lazy.
That's pretty lazy. He doesn't even have, there's another passage that's a complementary passage where that he doesn't even have the energy to go to the bowl.
Wow.
So then his body is like, okay, you've given me no calories. I guess I'm going to begin to eat my own flesh for caloric intake. That, my friends, is lazy, right?
Yes.
So that guy is not only, it says, the fool. Okay, well, we see that as utterly foolish. Duh. Wow, what an extreme version. Okay, let's go all the way back over to now, verses 7-8. The guy says this, and for whom am I laboring and striving and depriving myself of pleasure? He is working 24/7. He has no children. He is not leaving an inheritance. So there really is, he's going to die naked, alone, and have all of this money and all of this labor that he did. For what reason?
Yep.
Okay, so these are the two extremes, but the middle one, it says this. I love this. This is one of my favorite passages of all time. It says, one handful of rest is better than 2 fistfuls of labor and striving after the wind. So stick with me. One handful of rest, the assumption is the other handful is work. Mm-hmm. So you got one handful of rest. That is better than to, look at the language here, fistfuls. A handful versus a fistful. Even that language screams stress and burnout, does it not?
It really does, yes.
So our goal is to be this middle person who has one handful of rest and the other hand is full of labor. Mm-hmm. Work is not bad. Too much work is foolish. Zero work at all is foolish. And I got to say, I've seen the extremes inside of American culture. Hear me out. On one hand, it's like, I'm going to work obsessively hard so that I can live a life of doing nothing.
Yes.
I'm going to make $1 million so that I can sit on a beach and do nothing. And that is a terrible, terrible, terrible existence. And research shows that you die faster by doing nothing.
Right. And that's almost the American like dream, right?
It
Is like you work
is.
all of your life, work to the bone all of your life, save up all this money, and then retire to do nothing.
Right. And that's this elusive dream. And but what he's saying is it's a fool who does nothing.
Right.
It is actually beautiful, fulfilling. It's part of like being a human. It's part of being a fulfilled human to do stuff, to do work. It's good. But I've also seen far more Americans, okay, who are in whom am I laboring and depriving myself of pleasure? I'm working 24/7 and I'm burning it at every end. I see way more Americans on that side than I see Americans who are not doing anything and consuming their own flesh. By the way, they both exist, but in our culture, we have totally platformed the people who are obsessively working.
Right. It is so true. Yep. Oh.
Those are the people that have the mic. Those are the people who have the platform and the stage. And then we end up seeing their downfall. But this beauty in the middle, one handful of rest. And that's what we're talking about today, is this idea of, okay, let's talk about that handful of rest. Yes, you're going to work. You're going to do great work. We're talking to motivated people, right? I'm a motivated guy, but I want to focus today in order to not have burnout. How do I do this handful of rest? Okay.
Yep.
Now, but as we develop this, we take it a little deeper. Yikes. But ministry is not a normal schedule. So
True.
in this series about burnout, Bill, we've been discussing quite a few things, which is like church is unique. This is just one more of the unique things about this particular line that you stood in at the job fair. You're like, oh, I'm going to go stand in the ministry line. It's totally unique. And one of the ways is that it's not a normal schedule. 24 hours? Yeah, finding an uninterrupted 24 hours is tricky in ministry.
Yeah, it is.
People have problems, and those problems typically don't happen 9 to 5. Last I looked, the death of a spouse happens whenever it's going to happen, and that's sad. And I am on call, and I'm ready, and I'm very willing. I want to tell you, I'm very willing. But a marital problem, Bill, they came knocking at our door at their darkest time at 9:24 p.m. the day before school was starting for our children. And so my wife and I now, we receive these people because we know them and we're pastors and we're called to this. And they're like, hey, can we come in? And I'm like, well, and my wife, I had alerted her. I'm like, yep. And this was by far the most egregious sin thing that I could ever communicate. In terms of destruction of a marriage, I've never had anything more. I won't share it because it's just that bad. And I was just like, oh my ever-loving goodness. Yep, that didn't happen. Like, oh, hey, could we schedule your life falling apart? I'm good about 1 o'clock. Could you do 1 o'clock?
Right.
No,
Absolutely.
They came at 9:24 p.m. and we were up until, for sure, 1:24 p.m. And then it took up the rest of my week, right? And I still had all the regular tasks that needed to be done, but this was in addition. So the reason that this is so tough is that how am I going to find 24 hours to myself? It's very difficult. You see? Go ahead, Bill, take it.
Well, and by the way, like, so your example of having a couple come over at 9:24 at night, that is actually a huge piece of being in ministry where, like, other people who could help them, like, let's say you get, a toothache, your dentist, unless they're an emergency dentist, is going to tell you, great, we're open at 9 a.m.
We'll get you in
8
first.
a.m. We'll get you in first on Monday morning. You're just going to have to suffer until then, right? Let us know if something changes, right? Or your counselor, we're having a marriage issue. Great. Well, here's our schedule. We already have a full schedule. So we'll see you in 2 weeks. That's how it goes. But in ministry, there's an expectation that you, as their friend, as their pastor, as their spiritual leader, is going to drop everything and come to their aid in their moment of need. And that's very unique to ministry. That doesn't happen in other things. And so that's why getting those 24 hours is so difficult.
Yes, it is. And by the way, if your car breaks down, yeah, we're going to have the tow truck drop it off and you do the key drop and we'll get to it when we get to it. So
Right.
I've never thought about this. This is the only line at the job fair that has this unique qualifier. Wow. Well, let's jump back in. I'll tell you what, 24 hours? Okay, where am I going to find that? For ministry people, Sunday's the hardest day of the week. For the majority of the rest of the population, it's like, okay, I did my yard work on Saturday, and if I'm going to have a day off that's family oriented, that's seeking to get to know God better, I'm going to do that on a Sunday. That's their opportunity for Sabbath, but that's possibly my biggest work thrust of the week.
Right. Raise your hand if you take a nap on Sunday afternoon, right?
Yeah. That is so funny. And so, I mean, I do take a nap, but the interesting thing is, lo and behold, everybody else in the ministry world, everybody who's not in the ministry world, they're taking the day off, and it's go time. And I was far more exhausted a Sunday afternoon because of the level of on-ness, how
Right.
on I was, right? So that's huge. That's hard. That's a reality. And so that's big. So Sunday's the hardest day of the week. Now for ministry people, Sunday's the hardest day of the week, but how then can we find rest? What do we do? So now we're going to kind of land this plane and talk about some practicalities. Now, this next thing I'm going to discuss with you is kind of the big golden goose egg of this podcast. This is something that is not original with me. It is original with another pastor. He probably got it from somebody else, but he passed it on to me, and it's called the stacking of 3. This is where I find a pocket of rest. Now, if you are not watching this on YouTube and you're listening auditorially, it's going to be more challenging because I'm going to play some stuff on the screen. You might want to check this out on YouTube, but we'll do our best. We have 3 options for this stacking of 3. Because I don't typically have a day of the week, Sunday, that I can just be like, bingo! I get up on Sunday morning. I'm going to choose to do no work. I'm going to do family stuff. I'm going to go to church. And Sunday evening, here we go. I'm going to go to bed, and I wake up Monday morning, and now I'm re-engaged. That's not the pastor's life. So this is a sliding scale. What do I mean by that? On any given week, I'm going to have to find a unique pocket of 24 hours. It's not like all of a sudden I can guarantee, well, my Friday, that's when I'm not in the office. Good luck. So
Right.
there are times where you have to kind of like go, okay, whoa, I got to block this out. And so it's called a stacking of 3. Now, here's what it looks like. It's a morning, an afternoon, and an evening in any particular order. Option 1 is the easiest one to conceive of and to think about. It is a morning, an afternoon, and a consecutive evening where you are unplugging from moving things forward in ministry. And that green line at the bottom means you get a full night's sleep. And then the next morning, you re-engage and you start the engine of ministry and you start moving things forward. That's great. I wished it was this clean and this simple. But let's say that all of a sudden somebody comes to me with a ministry emergency in the morning. Okay, then I might need to choose option 2. I just had my morning blazed by somebody's problem. Now I'm going to go, okay, I just ate lunch. I have got to unplug. So I take the afternoon that evening, a big green line, which says I'm going to bed. Then I wake up the next day and I don't re-engage until after lunch.
Right.
Now watch this. So you might be like, okay, I've got this really great plan. I'm going to take my morning, my afternoon, and my evening. And then somebody absolutely jacks up and hijacks your entire day. Great. I eat dinner and I'm like, okay, I've got to find this pocket of rest. So I'm going to stack 3 buckets, evening, morning, and afternoon in a different way. So now I got done eating. I'm pulling the plug. I'm disconnecting from my phone. I'm disconnecting from email from church. I eat dinner, I go to bed, I wake up the next morning, and I take until all of my afternoon, and I eat dinner, and then I re-engage. So what it's trying to do is find a pocket where it's a morning, an afternoon, and an evening in consecutive order, in any order, along with the night of sleep. Bill, does that make sense to you?
Yeah, that's genius. I think a big piece of this is this would be something, this stacking of 3 would be something that you would want to take to the leadership of your church so you're all on the same page about this, right? Because people begin to expect your availability at certain times of the day. But if you had the freedom to say, hey, this is how I'm scheduling rest. If somebody comes to me in an evening time and throws me out of this, I want you to know that the next morning I'm going to be unavailable.
That's right.
Because I need to take this or however it pans out for you. But I think if you could get on the same page as a leadership team, this could be really effective.
Yes. And the funny thing is that I have watched this, especially with the senior leaders, right? Like if you're an administrative assistant, you're kind of putting in your 9 to 5 at the church and it's a little bit more structured. But if you're a senior leader at the church we're going to presume that you maybe get paid a little bit more, but also your responsibility and your availability goes up as well. They kind of happen synonymous with each other, don't they? And so for our pastoral staff, we always were like, hey, dude, you have freedom and you can dip to other people. And again, I'm not going to now watch this. You also have to understand this is the line that you stood in. I knew a pastor and he is no longer in ministry. And here is one of about 7 reasons why. Because when it was, quote, his time off, he went absolutely dark. And whether or not he had moved the ball forward enough, he was like, oh, no, I'm sorry. Like my work here is done. Okay, well, you didn't actually finish completing the event that is coming up like on Friday. I'm sorry, dude, I got as much done as I could. And so then other people are now in big trouble because this particular person, they just decided, no. I have a ironclad hard stop. Come hell or high water. Whoa. You need to be in a different job here. I'm sorry.
Right. Yeah. And that's what I was going to say. That's not the job, right?
That is not the job. And so then the pushback that this pastor gave on the regular was, well, I read a book by a guy that really said that we need to have health and balance in ministry. And I'm like, well, good for that guy. And I get that, but that's not necessarily completely the way that it goes, buddy.
No, it doesn't. Yeah. You can't just, it's not a job that you get to turn off. Like when a banker goes home at night, like banker's hours are like sought after because it's like when 5 o'clock hits, no one's calling you at 6 o'clock saying, I got an insufficient fund thing and I need you to help me. Sorry. No. I mean, we might have people overseas in our call center who are going to answer that, but
that's a new thing. Right? Right. That's a new thing.
Yes.
That's the response. Okay. That's the response that bankers ended up taking. They took that response because, all right, well, they took that response to get the overseas call people. The reason that they did that is because they were like, well, people can get kind of ticked off at us when we're not available. And so then they did the call center thing. But for literally 100 years, it was like, dude, 9 to 3, that's a banker's hours.
Yes.
And that's it. And so again, I would say to any person who has that mentality that they're going to be able to drop everything, right? And just like literally have no responsibilities. My push to them is going to be, hey, that is a fantastic ethic that you have, and that ethic doesn't really work for a ministry context.
Yes, absolutely.
Period. And so guess what? You're a great person. You love God. You love people, but you need to find a different career.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you're not. There are some people who are like legitimately, if that is your ethic, right? You're legitimately not there to actually be in ministry. You need to find something else that will allow you to do that, because that's not what you're signing up for.
And so, but again, there may be somebody out there who's like, but that's just inappropriate to expect your people to be on 24/7. And what my answer is, nobody is really on 24/7. we can find pockets. You just got to be super creative, i.e. the stacking of 3. If somebody's emergency comes and I have to deal with that, I'm going to need to find a creative workaround that I get my rest. And this particular guy was, you know what? No. I'm taking my rest exactly when I'm taking it, and there is no emergency. Like, my phone is off. Nobody at church can get a hold of me. No human, no volunteer, no nothing. Like, it's like, okay, you're a short timer then. You're not, well,
right.
Are you telling me that I'm signing up for burnout? No, I'm telling you need to be far more creative than you're being. And you're misplaced.
Yeah, absolutely. Intelligent adaptation is really important.
Well, let's land this plane and say we got to really remember, start small. Pick a time frame. I don't care if it's 24 hours. If, in fact, the best you can do is you have 6 hours that you're going to unplug from church, absolutely start there and just draw some boundaries. Try and give it a rest. Bill, any closing thoughts for our good people beyond the stacking of 3?
I will just say that you have to figure this out for your particular situation. There are methods, there are strategies. The stacking of 3 is super important, but you're going to have to find out how to find this balance yourself. And it might take a little work, and it's definitely going to take some trial and error. And the other thing I'll say too is that you have to recognize that in ministry, things are seasons. And so you might have a season where you don't have the most healthiest pattern. But if you find that season after season after season, you are not getting any rest time, that's a pattern for burnout. And so you need to find time to appropriate your rest for the ministry season that you're in.
And ministry is seasons. Am I right? And there's not just a weekly rhythm where you might need to find a stack of 3. There is a seasonal understanding that, like, oh, wow, the fall is often pretty busy. And, oh, good gracious. Well, listen, gang, this has been good. We would encourage you to view rest as a gift from God, and we would encourage you to find ways to creatively find rest for yourself. Well, gang, this is another episode of the Lead Ministry Podcast. We will catch you guys on the next one.
And that's a wrap for today's episode of Lead Ministry Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review. Make sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and visit leadvolunteers.com for more episodes and resources. Thanks for listening,